I'm Amy, sex educator, somatic sex and relationship coach, and sex shop owner.
And I'm April, VP of an international high-end pleasure products company and boss queen sex toy mogul. We're best friends who make our own rules about who we are as sexual beings.
With everything from how to be a badass in the bedroom to top tips for bringing your relationship to the next level, we have something just for you.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Don't forget to head on over to our website at shamelesssex.com for more. And for 15% off of some of our favorite sex toys, use coupon code SHAMELESSPP in all caps at purepleasureshop.com. Hello everyone, Amy here. No April this week, just myself and our wonderful guest, Stella Harris. April, I believe, is in Seattle doing some work around masturbation sleeves. So April will be back on the show next week. This week, featuring Stella Harris, we are going to talk all about squirting, gushing, G-spots, as well as vulva mapping, if you've ever heard of such a thing. So a really juicy, no pun intended, episode with Stella, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her. But she recently wrote a book called Tongue-Tied: Untangling Communication in Sex, Kink, and Relationships. So more about that soon. And then just a couple of shout outs before we dive in. In the episode, we talk a little bit further about OMGS in there. I get her opinion on it because she's another educator and coach who actually teaches people vulva mapping, which is kind of like what OMGS is all about. Learning where the sensations are, where the pleasure is, where there's even more pleasure that you didn't even know about. So stay tuned and listen to the episode for more info. But I don't know if I mentioned this on there, but our listeners get $5 off if you go to omgs.com/shameless. You get $5 off there. So stay tuned to learn more if you're wondering what I'm talking about. Also, one other announcement. Speaking of coaching, my partner and I are also doing couples coaching. You all know, or maybe you don't all know, but you've probably heard me say that I do coaching. I've done sex and relationship coaching for a while. I do it in person. I do it online. So does Stella Harris, our guest speaker. So she's in the Portland area, and she also does it online. So I'm definitely not saying don't go to her. And I also wanted to just give a shout out to the work that my partner and I are now doing for couples. If you are interested in working with the kind of the dynamic of the masculine and feminine, we are offering that either online or in person. My partner comes from a background of facilitating retreats. He's currently in a Hakomi holistic psychotherapy training. And so he has really wonderful skills on working with people. He gets really, really deep with them and deep in the core. I'm a little more heady. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's find all the solutions and move forward. And he's really great at getting into the nitty gritty of what needs to be worked on. So if you're looking to go deeper into that work, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email at shamelesssexpodcast@gmail.com, and I can give you more information. We have really affordable rates, and we are loving this work. So go ahead and reach out anytime. And last shout out before we dive into the podcast, we're not even answering sex questions this week. We're just diving right in, is to our wonderful friends at Bijou. We spoke about this on many a podcast, but we love their new horoscope line. This is an awesome gift set for you or for someone else. It comes with a little finger vibe as well as a little gem that's based on your birth month, and then also a clitoral stimulating balm, which can also be used on penises, by the way, and it's either in earth, air, fire, and water, depending on your sign. And this little kit, under $50. Holiday season's coming up, but it's also a great gift to give yourself. You get jewelry, sex toys, and clitoral balm all in one. And we love this. Bijou, by the way, is a women-owned company, and it's so cool. We have all these women-owned companies or female-centric companies that we're promoting. And also, I just want to give a shout-out to our team here, too. We have all these interns. We have someone helping us with Twitter now that is completely voluntarily based. We have someone else that's helping us out with our online marketing, another woman. So Pure Pleasure, Pure Pleasure, that's also women-owned, too, but Shameless Sex has a whole team of women including the person that runs our Instagram. It's all women. A lot of them are interns and volunteering to help us. So big shout out to everyone, all the women that are making Shameless Sex awesome and running. We love you, and we feel so honored for this opportunity to grow and for this team. So we love all of you. You know who you are. But Bijou, by the way, is another woman-owned company. So to learn more, go to bijouindiscrets.com. That's bijouindiscrets.com. And if you use code shameless in all caps, you get 15% off of any of your purchases. You can also get the new horoscope line at Pure Pleasure as well. We have a really beautiful display there if you live in Santa Cruz. And listeners always get 15% off with code shamelesspp in all caps at purepleasureshop.com. And that's with all sex toys. So if you just want the Bijou stuff, go to Bijou site. If you want the Bijou stuff and some other fun goodies and sex toys and things, then you can get it all at Pure Pleasure site as well. That's all my announcements for now. We're going to dive into the podcast because I know you all want to learn about the juiciness of squirting and G-spots and vulva mapping. Maybe you don't all want to learn that, but that's an assumption. We've talked about this on past podcasts. It was just usually podcasts between April and I, so it's wonderful to get another educator's feedback and opinion on this because there really isn't that much information about squirting. So it's really great to have someone else give their whole background and approach. And she's really knowledgeable. You're going to love her. Let me tell you a little bit about her. So, Stella Harris is changing the way people experience their sex lives. As a certified intimacy educator and sex coach, she gives her students the tools and confidence to explore their sexuality safely and free of shame. A national and international speaker, Stella teaches everything from pleasure anatomy to communication skills to kink and BDSM. Stella writes a weekly sex advice column for Portland's Willamette Week newspaper, and her erotic fiction has appeared in more than a dozen anthologies. Check out her latest book, Tongue-Tied, Untangling Communication in Sex, Kink, and Relationships, as well as her website at stellaharris.net. So, without further ado, let's dive on in. All right, everyone. It is episode time with the wonderful Stella Harris. I've already introduced Stella Harris. You know a lot about Stella, and we're going to hear a little more, but I just want to put it out there just so everyone knows that we just found out 5 seconds ago that Stella's laptop got switched in security. Stella came home with someone else's laptop, so we're on it to an interesting start. You're handling it well, though. I'm so impressed by you.
Yeah, you never know what the universe is going to throw at you.
Yes, throwing some curveballs. You just have some stranger's laptop here, and she's teaching a workshop. Do you use your workshop for classes? Your laptop for classes? Or
would have done PowerPoint, but luckily I have backup laminated anatomical charts because I'm used to technical problems. Not this technical problem, but I'm used to some sort, so I can go analog as needed. You're like, I'll figure it out.
What's the worst that could happen? So that's good. Yeah, I mean, you're, again, handling it well. Tomorrow she's teaching Wet and Wild G-spot and Squirting Orgasm workshop at Pure Pleasure. So that's part of the reason why she's in town, and I'm really excited to have her here. She's, as we said, a wonderful public speaker, and just wrote a book that I talked about in the intro as well, but it's called Tongue-Tied, Untangling Communication in Sex, Kink, and Relationships. And we're going to focus on a lot about more like squirting and G-spot stuff because I know that our listeners like that, but Stella has a lot of really great things to share about relationships in general, and I know you all want that too. So we're going to kind of move all over, but let's start with Stella, if you could just tell us, like, how did you get to where you are today? People are always curious, like, how does one become a sex coach, a sex educator, a author about sexuality? It's quite a unique journey.
Yeah. Looking back on it, I could sort of artificially draw a straight line. I can see how it makes sense. But it didn't occur to me that this was a job that could exist until about 6 years ago. In the intro of the book, I actually talk about my upbringing. I talk about having to battle some sex shame in my family, having to teach my grandmother about hymens. So from an early age, I did realize that people don't know about sex and bodies, and that I was sort of on my own to find good information. my mom had been sex positive, but then she died when I was relatively young. And so I lost sort of good familial information. But she was also a librarian, and I knew how to research because I grew up in libraries. So I learned a lot from books, and then just ended up advising a lot of my peers as I got older, first about contraception, later about pleasure. And then I worked in the nonprofit field for a decade, after also a detour to law school. So it was certainly not a straight line. What happened was, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, I was married, and the marriage opened up, and that process taught me an awful lot about that sort of transition to open relationships. I'd been in an open relationship before, but hadn't transitioned from monogamy to open. And the coach that helped my then partner and I through that ended up becoming a mentor of mine years later. And one of the things that I did when the relationship opened up was get very active in the Portland kink scene. And I started being asked to teach in the kink scene. And I started doing that. And people kept asking me to do more things. And that's when I realized, if I'm really going to make a go of this, I should go back and get more formal training in these areas. And that is when I went through a coaching training program, as well as the intimacy educator program, to sort of just put together the training and background that I wanted, because it didn't all exist in one place.
And then, so to get into teaching, you teach so many things. I was looking on your website, all the different options that you have, but to teaching G-spots and squirting classes, is there, is this like a particular passion of yours to teach this specific topic?
So the squirting class sort of grew out of a class that I teach called Mapping the Vulva. The squirting class was initially a special request by one of the venues that I teach for regularly, Shebop, a sex toy store we have in Portland. They said they were getting a lot of questions about squirting, and they asked if I could do a class on it. And I said, sure, because I already covered it in my general vulva class, but, it was maybe 5 minutes of that class. So I rewrote an outline that focused on that a great deal more. It's interesting that you ask if that's a particular passion of mine, because there are some ways in which that class a little bit goes against my usual style of teaching, because I really try to emphasize for people that sex shouldn't be goal-oriented. It doesn't need to look a particular way. It's probably not going to look the way porn looks. And squirting, I feel like it's an activity that can become more goal-oriented, right? Because either you have squirted or not. And so it's harder to make that about the journey the way you can with other sorts of touch and pleasure. So I really emphasize in that class that not everybody's body is going to do that, and that's okay. And it's not necessarily a better orgasm. And there are people who squirt who wish they didn't, because it's just kind of a hassle, and they can't have a quickie without planning for towels and, so it's not this end all be all, amazing thing that you're missing out on if you can't do. That said, I think it's really valuable for people to have all the tools to explore their bodies and find out what their bodies can do. And so in that sense, it fits in to sort of teach people the anatomy and touch techniques that they can try if it's something they want to do. And the other thing I really like about that class is it's a great opportunity to dispel a lot of anxiety and shame. I have had people cry in that class because they realize that they are not strange or wrong or broken, which is something I hear from people around a lot of topics, but specifically around this. I think a lot of people have a lot of embarrassment. They think that it's urine, and they think that that's shameful. I also emphasize that even if it is urine, who cares? Urine is really the safest body fluid to be playing with if you're going to play with one of them. No big deal if everyone's having a good time. So it becomes a little bit of a soapbox for me, more so than my other classes. Actually, I've had to pare it down a little bit. I think the first time I did the class, there was about 40 minutes of me talking about politics and science, because of the ways in which bodies have been treated in science, especially people who are assigned female at birth. Masters and Johnson and Kinsey Institute, all of these places witnessed squirting in the lab and then dismissed it. And I have people in the class, I sort of hand out these cards and have them read quotes where they reading from the science where people said, oh yeah, we observed this, but we don't think it's a thing. Like it doesn't even follow logically in their own words. We saw this, but we're ignoring it. So it is a chance for me to talk about the ways in which our personal explorations and our anecdotes, at least in some areas of sex and bodies, are just as valuable as sort of whatever big research or, in some cases, what the medical profession has to work with, which is awful. I don't think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
But until sex positive science gets funding, we are going to have to keep figuring some of this out on our own.
You got to get the pharmaceutical companies on board. Apparently,
Right?
That's all they care about. Money. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions as if I don't know anything about this, and I'm probably going to learn things from you anyways, since I probably don't know everything about this anyways. Can everyone squirt? Or in a squirting, gushing, I use the word gushing too, but every female body person have the ability to do this?
I don't think so.
Okay.
All bodies are different. I know some people who teach squirting or gushing say everybody can do this, and they're coming from a place of meaning to empower people and meaning to normalize it. And I have heard from people who have been to those classes and they feel more broken when they leave if they can't do it. So no, I don't think all bodies do it, because I don't think there's any universal thing that all bodies do, regardless of gender. So I don't think everybody can do it. And it also looks different for different people. For some people, they don't know that it happened until they see that there's a puddle on the sheets. And for other people, it sprays like a fountain and everywhere in between. So even if people are doing it, it doesn't always look the same and it doesn't always feel the same.
And then, to your knowledge, what is it? What is this fluid coming? How is this happening? What's going on?
Well, there's a lot going on there. They've done multiple studies where they actually test the chemical makeup of the fluid. They'll have, people pee in a cup and then empty their bladder and then ejaculate or squirt into a cup, and then they test that, and it is chemically mostly different
From urine.
Yeah. There's sometimes a tiny bit of urea, but that's true for pre-ejaculate and people with penises as well. Like part of its job is to clear the urine out of the system, because urine is not conducive to conception. And whether we like it or not, our bodies are trying to get pregnant. So a lot of the things that our bodies do are to facilitate that. So one of the theories is it's something that helps flush out the system and make it more welcoming to sperm. Whether or not you're actually engaging with sperm, that's what bodies are looking for, so that's part of it. The actual fluid has a lot of similarities with prostatic fluid. And so people are calling sort of the G-spot an analogous structure to the prostate. And then we get into a lot of sort of complicated nuance about anatomy and how most of what we know about anatomy is wrong. For one thing, the G-spot isn't really a spot. It's not a thing. And that's part of why when doctors and scientists go looking for it, there's nothing to find. Because what it actually is an area on the anterior wall of the vaginal canal that happens to be very sensitive in some people. And it is associated with the urethral sponge. And because the urethra runs the whole length of the vaginal canal, the part that's sensitive can be basically anywhere. And now there's more awareness of the internal clitoral complex, and that has as much erectile tissue as a penis. You just can't see most of what it's doing. And so rather than G-spot, this doesn't have much of a nice ring to it, but more accurately, we're now talking about the clitorourethral vaginal complex, or the CUV complex, which I don't think is going to take off.
A little wordy,
but that is more accurately what we're dealing with here. It's all of those structures interfacing with each other. So there was actually an interesting study was done by an Australian doctor. She dissected a lot of corpses and checked out their genitals. And what she found was sort of a mixed bag, but one of the major findings of that was there were all of these little ducts from the urethral sponge feeding into the urethra. And where those were on different bodies varied wildly. Some of them were very close to the urethral opening. Some of them were much closer to the bladder. And you can look this up online. There are, sort of the black and white MRI images of what was going on there. And so one of the best guesses now for what's going on there is that as the urethral sponge fills with tissue, the tissue fills with fluids, those ducts sort of let that fluid backflow into the urethra and potentially backflow all the way into the bladder. And then with what we're calling squirting or gushing, it is that fluid flushing out. On the does everybody do it note, there is something called a retrograde ejaculation, and this happens for people with penises as well, where instead of coming out of the body, the ejaculate does go back up into the bladder. So it's also possible that for some people who don't think they're squirting, many of these processes could be occurring and the fluid could be going the other way, and then it just gets mixed in with your urine when you're peeing after sex, and you may never know. Because you're probably not checking that closely. Of like,
what
is this color at all different than what it normally is? So that's a little bit about the anatomy and the what's happening. So for most people, the fluid actually comes out of the urethra. That said, some people do have an excess of fluid actually exiting the Skene's glands. And some people even say that they have fluid coming out of the vaginal canal.
Interesting.
But it seems like for the majority of people, it comes out of the urethra.
Yeah. And then, so... Yeah, this is such a complicated.
Clear as mud now, right?
Yeah, well, and I understand, but I'm just thinking of all the books that I've read and things like that. I've only seen like one book really explain that with the kind of what you're talking about on a cellular level, which is the Women's Anatomy of Arousal. And I remember when I did my training with SFSE, over 10 years ago now, to be a sex educator, and I minored in human sexuality. I didn't see anything about the clitoris being these three parts, and female ejaculation being explained as, or squirting being explained as something on a cellular level, other than like Deborah Sundal talking about like it just happens and it's wonderful. Have you? Like, I mean, what is your understanding? If there's a lot of this it's not a newer thing. It's just that we're understanding it in a new way. And there's have you seen a lot of literature on this? I mean, you've seen some studies, but not a lot.
Yeah, I've seen some studies. I get in there and I'm downloading all the studies that are done, and there's like 2 or 3. There's very little. There's a couple of newish ones. There's not a lot of great stuff out there. In terms of is it new? No, but we keep rediscovering information. When I'm teaching the class, part of the quotes that I hand out and some of the images that I have, there's images in art back thousands of years that basically depict squirting. And sometimes it does have a spiritual component. In Sanskrit, the word for that ejaculate was amrita, the fluid of the gods. And a number of different religions and cultures make reference to this. So we knew about it. We've known about it for thousands of years. But knowledge has repeatedly been suppressed over the years. Science gets repressed by, religion, by politics. And that's something that's happened in anatomy books. More than once, there has been sort of a culling of information from the books, and then we lose things in day-to-day knowledge. So we used to know a lot more about anatomy, and then it was intentionally suppressed. And so now we're relearning things. The whole idea of G-spot and squirting sort of didn't get popularized until the 80s. And even still, I think most people don't know that that's a thing. So it's not as widely known as I think it should be.
What about, I know a number of people. I know a lot of squirters. I'm someone myself, and I like my, for me, it's something that it comes in waves. Like my first orgasm, it was easy for me. I ejaculated. I was like, let's go. I know what this is, but this is confusing. And my mom was a squirter and her mom was a squirter. So we're like, oh, and I think
I wonder if it runs in families.
Well,
that's amazing.
I was gonna say, I think that
everyone email me and tell me if that's true.
I think just my theory was just that some bodies it's easier to access, and for some folks that it's just either harder to access or they can't access or whatever it is. They have some sort of mental block. There's so many things there, but I also know a number of people that just still to this day, because they've never done it and they, are nurses, they're like, it's not real, it's impossible. What do you say to the naysayers when they say that, when they're like, I don't know if you encounter them, but the people that really just still won't get on board and don't believe that it's a thing?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that my body can't do that I know are possible. I mean, my housemate runs marathons, and I would be inclined to say that that's not possible if I was only basing it on what my body can do. And also, I think you're absolutely right about the mental piece there. And that's part of why I talk about the culture and the shame so much in the class, in part because that mental block can change what your body is capable of. And that's true for all kinds of sexual response. It happens when people are trying to get erections. It happens when people are trying to access any kind of arousal. Your brain needs to be on board. And if you are worried about something like wetting the bed, making a mess, we clench down. The sensation of squirting for a lot of people does feel similar to urinating, because it is coming from the same place. And I think a lot of people have that sort of feeling and then shut it down, sort of clamp down on their PC muscles, don't let it happen. And it's very possible they don't know that they're doing that. So a big part of what I talk about in the class is the relaxation piece, the letting go piece, going ahead and pushing. One of my colleagues wrote an article that I love, and she described it as trying to pretend like you're trying to lay an egg for the sensation of doing that pushing.
It's like a bearing down kind of,
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are not doing those pieces. I think a lot of people are doing the opposite of that.
Yeah, that's, the mind and the way that it gets in, it makes such a big difference if we have this big block, if there's shame and fear. So what are some other tips then for people who want to learn this? They've either never experienced it, or maybe they've been able to squirt or gush once and then they kind of turned it off somehow subconsciously. How do you help guide people to gain that skill or understanding of their body, I guess?
So again, all bodies are different. There are absolutely some people who squirt from external stimulation, clitoral stimulation. When I was actually a kid first learning to masturbate, I was squirting with external stimulation only. I had no idea what it was, but I would always grab a pile of tissues and put them between my legs because I knew it would be a mess. I wasn't too worried about it, but and then at some point that just went away. So I don't know if there was a mental shutting down or what that was. So absolutely, some people will squirt from external stimulation. That's true of some friends of mine. The majority of people, it seems to more linked with internal stimulation. So stimulating the region that we call the G-spot and stimulating that area vigorously seems to be the closest we have to a sure thing. It's not going to work for everybody, but that's sort of the first thing I suggest people try, with all the caveats that not everybody is into penetration. Not everyone is into vigorous penetration. So that's not going to be for everyone. The other thing is if you're experimenting on your own body, a lot of people, their arms aren't long enough. Their, wrists and fingers don't have the dexterity to reach their own body and move in the ways that are necessary. So having some sort of a toy intended for G-spot stimulation is really ideal for that. I really like the Pure Wand. That's the one that I demo in the classes. It's
the Enjoy. Yeah, NJOY. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. TSA also got to look at that as
I was like, what is this huge metal thing?
They opened my my suitcase and had a moment with that one.
Did you make sure you still have that?
That was in the suitcase, so that I should still have.
That'd be funny if you swap that. Someone else had one too, and you swapped.
And I would never know.
Someone else's sex stainless steel, everyone, and very easy to clean, so that's good.
Yeah, that gets spoiled a lot. There's a lot of sex toy HIT in my house.
I bet.
So some sort of a G-spot wand can be really helpful if you're trying on yourself, because it really helps you reach that area. And because those toys are generally used with sort of a pivoting motion, it can just also be easier on the wrist and arm to get that kind of force than sort of straight up thrusting.
Okay. And on the note of the mental, because I know a part of it is, setting up a space that's safe and relaxing and being able to be present in your body. And if you have any sort of tightness, then your pelvic floor is going to follow too. And we've talked about this on past podcasts. One thing I'll just out a personal experience that I've had is my ability to ejaculate comes in waves based on what's going on in my life. And so I'll have this, like when I was at age 18 to 19, that's when I had my first orgasms, was ejaculating. We use it with orgasm with a strong vibrator on my clit. And then I turned it off mentally. I was like, no, I don't know if I like this thing. And then it went away for a number of years. And then it came back on when I was about 25 from someone very vigorously milking my G-spot in a way that's just, there was not an actual muscle contraction orgasm. It was just the release that comes with ejaculation. Had that for a number of years. Now what's happening is when I have things that go on in my life, like there's some sort of mini emotional trauma or big emotional trauma, it'll turn off for a while, turn off for about 6 months. It's hard to access. And then all of a sudden it'll get turned on again by an experience that was just kind of like a really juicy experience. What can you say about that in the terms of the more like mental experiences of how this process is related to the actual experiences that are happening in our life that might not even be related to sexuality?
Yeah. Well, it is worth noting in something that you said, that ejaculation and orgasm are separate biological processes. Regardless of what kind of genitals you have, you can have one without the other. And a lot of people do report squirting sort of before or separate from orgasm. But yeah, absolutely. It's a part of your mental state. We talk so much with people about, doing things like Kegels and strengthening their pelvic floor. But for most people, they're actually carrying around extra tension.
Yeah, too tight.
And so just telling people to exercise more is sort of the opposite of what a lot of people need. And one of the things that really helps with this is relaxation techniques, breathing techniques. I work people through a breathing exercise in the class for this. And so I think you're absolutely right that if you're stressed or if you're feeling unsafe, your body is not going to be in a place to relax fully. There are things that we can tell our bodies to do and other things that we can't just talk them into. I mean, it's sort of like, with anal sex, where the external sphincter, you can, tell it what to do. And the internal one, you have to be genuinely relaxed because you don't have conscious control over that. And so I think that this is very similar, with the squirting piece. Like, are there techniques that you can do to help yourself relax? Can you light candles, have soft music? Absolutely. But if you're not feeling safe and comfortable in your life, or if you're not feeling safe and comfortable with the partner that's with you, I think your body knows all of that, and it just doesn't always respond. Yeah.
In my case, I think it was also had the physical trauma of, which I've talked about in the podcast many times, of actually having an abortion, and something in that, it made it, since then it's just been like hard to access. It's something that will come and go here, but isn't a regular thing. And I think I just want to highlight that everything is connected, right? There's like our physical experience, our emotional experience, maybe for some folks, the spiritual experience is all just so connected and all working together. And I'm the master of trying to read a book to figure out all of my sexual problems. It doesn't necessarily work that way, everyone. Like there's an experiential experience and practice here that actually ties in there too. I'm curious about this vulva mapping that you spoke to, because here's another thing that I've been talking to a lot of people about. I created this very informal survey. I've talked about it on a podcast before. If you go to our website, shamelesssex.com, on the bottom it says it's a survey on female sexual pleasure, and it's very informal. It's just asking female body folks to answer a number of questions about what feels good, what doesn't feel good, how are they having the orgasms that they're having. I'm wondering what your thoughts. You can tell me more about vulva mapping, and also I've seen a number of studies on how, of course, everyone's different. Some people more nerve endings around the head of the clitoris. Some people have more nerve endings all around the labia or in the vulva. Some people have a lot of nerve endings inside. A lot of people don't have nerve endings around the inside, except for around the cervix or like the first inch. And then how this relates to the pleasure, right? Like I'll talk to some folks who just having a dildo or a penis inside of them feels amazing, just having that in there. And I'm like, do you just have a lot more nerve endings inside of you than I do? Because for me, it needs a lot more stuff, and people just aren't talking about it this way. So I'm just curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So all bodies are innervated differently, and lack of knowledge about this causes a lot of problems. So when people have cosmetic surgeries like labiaplasties, sometimes they lose the ability to orgasm because they might be someone for whom a lot of those nerves were in the labia and they removed them. This is not something doctors warn people about before they have those sorts of surgeries. And you mentioned sort of the most nerve endings being sort of in the first inch or so of the vaginal canal. That was something that I was actually taught in my training, and I was saying in classes for a while. And then I later learned that that is actually more true for nerve endings that experience stretch, basically. And that is a feature of childbirth, because we want childbirth to not be so excruciating that nobody does it. The whole vaginal canal doesn't experience that sort of stretching sensation in the same way. That's more only in the first inch or so. And yeah, so a friend of mine has been working on making sex toys, Franklin Vo, and he was trying to make basically a bionic strap-on so that the person wearing it would have something inside of them that connected to the external strap-on part so that they could feel the sensation of the thrusting. And so to do that, he needed to know, well, exactly where are the nerves in the vaginal canal so where should I be putting, these different sensors? And he looked for all of the studies, and they don't exist. You can find the detailed innervation of a penis, of a nose, of a finger. The science actually doesn't exist for the vaginal canal. Again, because we just don't do that science. So then he backed up and said, well, I guess I'm going to have to do this myself. And because I'll do just about anything for science, I had an interesting afternoon where I had what was basically a homemade dildo covered in thumbtacks that were hooked up to wires inside of me, while he sort of very like mad scientist style, flipped switches, turning electricity on to each of those points. And very much like one of those hearing tests in school where you raise your hand when you hear a noise, I was sort of raising my hand when I could feel the electrical stimulus.
To see where the nerve endings are and where you have stimulation.
Exactly.
Or sensation.
And so I found out that I have a huge dead spot on one side inside, and fascinatingly found out that if he stimulated 2 points at once and one was at the dead spot and the other wasn't, I couldn't feel either. I don't know what that translates to other than it's fascinating. And among the people he did this with, he did at least dozens of people, it was different for everyone. So he didn't come away with like, oh, great, here's how I designed the toy. It was, oh wow, gosh, everyone's different. This is interesting, but it doesn't translate to great toy design. Which is part of why the same sex toys don't work for everybody, because things are so different. And that's part of why the Mapping the Vulva class exists, because everybody is different. I can't tell you what's going to feel good to you, but I can tell you some ways you can explore your own body and find out what feels good. So that is a big part of what I do. I talk about touch techniques that you can use to explore your body or a partner's body. And then I talk about the communication skills to use to investigate if that touch is having the desired effect, and to have the language to modify those kinds of touch. Because normally we just ask people, is this okay?
More, less.
And that's great. I mean, please check in. It's better than not checking in. But also that doesn't really give you actionable information about what would make something better.
I did this recently with my partner, where they had a finger inside of me and they were touching just different areas of my my vaginal canal, and asking me that, like, is there sensation here? Is there sensation here? And kind of moving around clockwise in different areas, like 1 inch and 2 inches and 3 inches in. And I already knew a lot of this because I've done it with myself before, but it was very helpful for them to understand the parts of my anatomy that don't really have a lot of sensation, the parts that do have a lot of sensation. And I mean, I'm still learning a lot about it as well, but I thought it was really fun experiment, and I think very enlightening to them, and gave them a lot more understanding of what my body might like or not like, because they got a really clear conversation related to where I feel and don't feel.
That's wonderful. I wish everyone would do that with their partners.
Well, I wish everyone could use that thing, the thumbtack thing, and everyone, the thumbtacks, they were not pointing outward, just so you know, but I think that would be so, I know, damn. I mean, I think that would be so, something like that for people to have, again, like a greater understanding of their bodies, and would help them to know that they're not broken. It's just that we're all designed differently. Things are put in different places, and to understand what's unique to you, I think that's awesome.
And these things aren't constant, even on the same body. As you were saying, what mood you're in, how much you've slept, what's going on in your life, what part of the month it is. Things change over time. Things change based on medical procedures and childbirth. So all of this is constantly changing. It also changes with stages of arousal. And for a lot of people, penetration doesn't feel good until they're very aroused. And some of these anatomical structures we've been talking about can take up to 40 minutes or more to become fully engorged. And for some people, penetration doesn't feel good at all, or at least not as good as it can feel until that arousal has taken place. So I also tell people in my class, if you're curious and excited and you like run straight home and put your fingers in yourself, you might not find what you're looking for, because unless you found my class exceptionally arousing, you already turned on. That's maybe, it's not going to feel like anything. Yeah. So you still have to do that arousal work before you go looking.
Yeah. Two things. One, have you heard of OMGS? Probably because you're an educator. So OMGS is something we talk about in the podcast often. That I think honestly, people want like the deep dive into the work. I think actually going to a workshop or working with a coach is like the way to go if you really are trying to work on different aspects of your body, or understanding your body in a deeper way. And OMGS, I've had a number of clients. I don't know if you recommend it to people ever, but where it's been really helpful. Like people who either they're already having amazing orgasms, but they go to use OMGS. So it's an online program for all of you who haven't heard. We've talked about it before, but online program where you get these 62 videos and different modules, and it shows you about different techniques for external vulva stimulation, and it just really expands the menu. And I've had a number of clients who were already having good orgasms, but just wanted more, and they didn't realize that there was all these other sensations possible that they're not seeing because it's not in porn. They're not showing all these different ways, or also people have had a hard time having orgasms or not having orgasms at all, and it's been a game changer. So and what I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I mean, they sent me a code to test it when it was newer. I don't know if anything has changed since I played with it, because that was at least a year ago. Yeah. I really loved it. I love the concept. I love what it makes available. I love that it's real bodies. When I played with it, the range of people was not as wide as I would like it to
like
be.
More diversity in the folks.
Yeah, it would have been like nice to see different body sizes, to see some trans folks, that sort of thing. That was not quite as broad as I would like. Maybe they've changed that in the last year.
Yeah, my knowledge is that they are, because they're doing different seasons, and they're just finishing season 2, which is internal stimulation, and I think ejaculation is in it. And then season 3, they're going to do more stuff with trans folks, with pregnant folks, with all kinds of stuff. They're doing male bodies too. So because it's research based, they're taking the information from what they learned from season 1 and then applying it to the next ones. And I know that they've heard that too.
Great.
So
I will loop back and play with it again. But I've absolutely sent people to it because not only are you learning those actual techniques, but because the way it's set up is about people talking about their bodies, it's actually, perhaps unintentionally, modeling the kind of communication where you might tell a partner how you like to be touched, or the questions you could ask a partner about what they like around their body, because it's also modeling those conversations as it sort of tells the viewer. Yeah,
as it's happening. How do you, so on just like a kind of maybe a Cliff Notes version, because I know we could talk about it for like 5 hours, but what is your advice for people in the moment when they're being touched by a lover or a partner and they want something different? What is your kind of go-to protocol for how they can ask for that or guide that in a way that isn't triggery or for them that they feel just comfortable doing for asking for?
Absolutely. I really encourage people to negotiate their communication style in advance. So if it's a new partner, when you're having your safer sex talk, when you're talking about what's on the menu for that night, I think it's really helpful up front there to talk about, here's the kind of feedback, here's the kind of conversation I like to have. When it's people who have already been touching each other for a long time and maybe never asking for anything different, it can be jarring to suddenly start talking during sex if you've been having the same sex for 10 or 20 years. So again, I really think it's valuable to have a conversation first, and it's really valuable for a lot of folks to either gamify it or treat it not as sex, but as exploration time, because people have such a hard time with the idea of talking during sex. I think instead it's really valuable if they do something like you were talking about, saying like, hey, let's go explore each other's bodies. Let's, go have this playtime that is not necessarily about penetration or about orgasm. It's just about exploring each other's bodies and talking about touch techniques, or doing, exercises. There's one in my book where I encourage people to ask for everything. So from, hold my hand, kiss my neck, every single touch that's going to happen has to be asked for, to start getting people used to doing the asking. I often also suggest that people start with massage, because a lot of the same language is appropriate, but it's less emotionally charged. So if someone's squeezing your shoulders, it's just as appropriate to say, faster or slower, harder or softer, left or right. And it turns out a lot of that translates to genital touch as well. But most of us have less of our ego tied up in how good of a massage we give. So sometimes it can be easier to hear that feedback in another area of our lives first, before they dive straight into doing it in sex. We can also borrow a lot of communication techniques from the business world. I talk about sandwiching a lot, which is, again, this is something that you would get in business classes, and this all has to be true, but you can sort of couch the change that you're asking for between two positives. So you could say something like, I really love the way you're touching me. I wonder if you could do it a little bit harder. I'm really enjoying having sex with you. Something like that. And now it's not just to artificially stroke someone's ego. Those things all have to be genuinely true. But if you're worried about hurting someone's feelings, which most people are with sex with a partner, that's one of the most common reasons I hear that people don't speak up, is they don't want to hurt the other person's feelings or rock the boat, or, they just think, like all the jokes about like, pizza and sex, like even, bad pizza is still pizza. But I really don't think that applies. I know people view it that way, but I really think most of us could be having much better sex if we were using our words in that. But I think it can be helpful to ramp up to that slowly and gently if you're not used to giving feedback and your partner's not used to hearing feedback.
Yeah. So in other words, more practice and practicing in ways that aren't the most like scary, vulnerable places, and all the start practicing the other avenues before, and then it will translate into sexuality. And even in sexuality, in the, in the bedroom or wherever you're having sex, maybe you're not having sex in the bedroom, that in itself will be its own practice too.
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about your book then, because I know that that you just came out last month, or
it came out in September.
Okay. Yeah. And this is an evergreen product, so maybe you're listening to this in like 2025. So, but this is November 2018. So yeah. So Tongue-Tied: Untangling Communication in Sex, Kink, and Relationships. Tell us a little more about your book.
Absolutely. So this book came out of a conversation with Cleus Press. They actually initially approached me about doing a bondage book. And because I am who I am, when we were on the phone, I was geeking out about the communication and negotiation piece so much. They called back a week later and said, actually, why don't you do a book about that? And that whole thing, of course, was a little bit of a miracle. People probably know that usually the publisher doesn't just call you. So that kind of blew my mind, because when that happened now about almost 2 years ago, I was at a point where I thought, okay, I need to get either an official advanced degree or a book deal to sort of add legitimacy to my career, because there's a lot of gatekeeping, as you know, and around, access to teaching in more academic places. And I do speak in a lot of universities, but I'm always there as a guest speaker, of course, not as a professor. And so I was sort of thinking like, okay, well, what can I do to be, more well known? And And I'd actually just taken a graduate level counseling course at Portland State University, sort of testing the waters of doing that. And then this book fell into my lap, and I'm like, oh, well, there you go then. I was going to do one or the other, and now one of them has been handed to me. And it was really perfect because that communication piece, it does work itself into every single class that I teach, as I was saying, even when it's, it's a pegging class, it's a bondage class, it's the vulva class, almost half the time is about the talking piece, because that's so essential to every kind of sex. And so I really enjoyed being able to do a book that is all about the talking pieces and really trying to demystify a lot of that, really trying to help people see how many assumptions they have and how that might be getting them into trouble. So there are a lot of exercises people can do, both for self-work and with a partner. There are some worksheets. So it's everything from self-exploration to things to do with a partner.
Awesome. Sounds like the kind of book that our listeners would like when we've done a poll of like what they're looking for. Their top things are that you all are interested in are more like communication, relationships, and stuff, and partnership stuff, or how to be like a better lover. Sexual mastery. So it's there's and. I need to read this book too. So. Okay, my last question before we wrap up. Do you ever find as a sex educator, sex coach, that there's a lot of, April and I, who with podcasts together, we're talking about this, that there's like a lot of pressure to have it all figured out. Does that ever happen for you? This feeling of like when your sex life or your relationships aren't, you're confused and you're lost, and I don't understand this part of my body or my relationship. Do you ever feel like there's a lot of pressure there for you to have it because of your job title? Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of my classes came out of that fear. I do a class about imposter syndrome. And this is one that I do for professionals at conferences, because I was having that feeling so much, that feeling of, it was sort of twofold. One was just the sheer terror that someone would ask me a question in a class that I didn't know the answer to. And two, that if everything in my personal life to do with sex and relationships isn't perfect, then who am I to try to help anybody ever? And so trying to get over those things absolutely was difficult. And I'm not 100% there yet either. I still have moments. If I have a miscommunication with a partner or with a friend, I will absolutely kick myself. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be good at this. Yeah, I'm supposed to have this down. Yeah.
How did this happen? And part of how I handle that is trying to be really real and vulnerable in my classes. I've absolutely stood in front of 100 people and said, so, hey, like, I'm still working on this thing. Here is what I know to be true. I'm not perfect at it yet, but here's what I know to be true, and maybe you can learn from this. And so I just try to be as transparent and vulnerable as I can about the stuff that I don't have figured out or that I am still working on. And I think that it's valuable too that people don't look at educators or coaches as though we're perfect and have it all figured out, because I think that is distancing and alienating. I think it's far more important to show, like, there are some things we know that maybe you don't know, and also we're still just human beings who are still learning and trying and figuring it out. Yeah.
And then through that learning comes the ability to teach it, because you've been through all the hardships, all the ups and downs from the bottom to the top, and then down to the bottom again, and then maybe in the middle, and then down to the bottom. And
it creates so much empathy too, and that is something I try to talk about. I've done a lot of storytelling shows, like the Risk podcast and shows in Portland. And I do one about, my marriage, and I do talk about like, oh, even though I thought I knew so much about sex and my sexuality, I ended up getting into a marriage with someone I wasn't particularly compatible with. And like, we were monogamous and vanilla and all of these things that really didn't work for me. And I did it anyway. And, had a marriage that was semi-sexless. And I tell people that now, and they're just like, I don't get that. I've seen you having like orgies in public. How could that have been you? But it happens. Like, that can happen to anybody. And having had that experience and knowing what that feels like, and having lived through a time where I genuinely believed, gosh, maybe I'm just not that into sex. Because it's really hard to pinpoint the problem when you're in the middle of it. And having been through that now helps me see when other people are in a similar place, or to have empathy with them. And because I share that sort of thing, it makes people feel safe, hopefully, telling me when they're in those situations as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's you become relatable in that sense, and then it helps to normalize the experience for people. And I like what you just said, that part about like maybe sex isn't for me. I think a lot of our listeners, the sex questions we get is maybe because I have low desire right now in my relationship, and sex just isn't my thing, and then they have different experiences that show them otherwise. It's just based on a lot of different factors that can be worked on should you choose to do that. How can people work with you? Because I know that you do coaching, and I know we have your book at Pure Pleasure. We also have the Enjoy one that we were just talking about. But how can they get your book? How can they work with you? How can they learn more about you?
Yeah. Well, the sort of one stop is my website, stellaharris.net. The book is available at many local sex toy stores and bookstores. It's also available from Amazon or from Cleus's website. So those are the sort of sure things if you don't see it locally. If you'd like to work with me, again, starting on my website is great. I do phone and Skype coaching to folks anywhere in the world. If you're coming through Portland, I have an office there. I also do coaching online with Juicebox. So you can find me there if you would like. And I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm on pretty much everything as either Stella Erotica or Stella Harris Erotica, because I chose all my handles back in my erotica writing days, which I was doing for a while before I was doing the education piece.
And if you all don't know about Juicebox, I've talked about it before because I'm a coach in there as well. And so Stella's is as well as Juicebox for at least just iPhones right now, right? It's not like on Android right now, I think.
They're sort of testing some ways.
Yeah.
They're testing some stuff in Slack right now for folks who don't have iPhones.
Yeah.
But it's I think in beta still.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I have some Slack clients right now. It's so it's a online chat anonymous coaching forum where you can get your sex questions answered directly with a sex and relationship coach. And it's all anonymous because it's all chat, so they can't see your face, or you can use this code name if you want to, and they answer your sex questions in 24 hours. So if you go to Juicebox, you can look that up. It's a really awesome, easy outlet for people to get support. Again, the book is Tongue-Tied: Untangling Communication in Sex, Kink, and Relationships by Stella Harris. Go check it out. And thank you so much for being on our show. And then, this is going to come out next week, so it's after you've already taught at Pure Pleasure. But I also learned more about Stella's workshops. If you go to her website, she teaches a lot of things. Just to give you all a rundown of some of the options of other workshops that she teaches, if my laptop allows me to pull it up fast enough. So there's the G-spot and squirting orgasms. There's a communication in the bedroom to learn to ask for what you want. There's Tongue-Tied the class. There's Mapping the Vulva, Introduction to Rope Bondage. If you're in, if you're in Portland, she has a class coming up on November 14th. If you're in Seattle, she has a class coming up on the 23rd of November. This is 2018. There's lots coming up, everyone. So go check it out. Go learn. And then just one last shout out. We drink wine often on this podcast. April's not here. We're not drinking wine right now, but I'm still going to give a shout out to Margins Wine. There's a difference between something that is sustainable and from underrepresented grapes, and is a woman-owned and operated company, and it is raw, and it is nice and clean, and it is a wonderful wine. So Margins Wine, go check it out, marginswine.com. And you can also use the coupon code SHAMELESS10 for 10% off of 3 bottles or more, or SHAMELESS15 for 15% off of 6 bottles or more. So go check it out. Our girl, Megan Bell. Thank you, Stella, and have a good class tomorrow. I won't be able to be there. I'll be in Berkeley, but it was, so happy that you came in. I really hope you get your laptop back.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And then, as April would say, everyone, ciao for now. Don't forget to head on over to our website at shamelesssex.com for more. And for 15% off of some of our favorite sex toys, use coupon code SHAMELESSPP in all caps at purepleasureshop.com.